This is the 17th season of Bass Talk Live with your hosts, Mark Jeffries and Matt Pingrack. BTL is brought to you by Lawrence, Bass Cat Boats, APCO, Duck and Fishing, Strike King Lures, Sunline, Big Bite Baits, Spro, Exo Lures, Yamagatsu, The Bass Tank, and Denali Rods. BTL coming at you.
We are live on a Tuesday. It is March 23rd. And this is Bass Talk Live. Jeffrey's still on the mend if you caught yesterday's BTL. He jumped on from the comfort of his couch to discuss what's been going on with him for the past couple weeks, but he's definitely on the mend. Brad was nice enough to come back in studio today. What vehicle are we driving into the studio these days, Brad?
We're driving the Dodge Dually.
The Dodge Dually. Brad's truck is still getting fixed after he used a pair of pliers. What was it yesterday? A pair of pliers on the brake caliper?
Vice grips on the brake line.
Vice grips on the brake line.
Yep.
You got to get that done by Friday. That's when we're supposed to leave, dude.
Man, I'm hoping I get a call from Kenny either today or tomorrow morning.
I gotcha. Well, we still got a bunch going on today. We are going to be joined by the one and only John Soukup, who has been a guest on Bass Talk Live before to talk about the Bass Tank. It's basically like a one-stop electronic shop that he started in 2017. I remember when he started, he was trying to come up with a name for it. And he kept you remember this? He kept running around all the names, and he settled on the Bass Tank. And I was like, man, it kind of sounds like the hog trough deal that you have at fishing expos. Yeah. Have you ever been up on one of the hog troughs?
Yeah, I've been on a hog trough.
Have you done seminars on the hog trough?
Yeah.
Do you remember the first seminar you ever did on a hog trough, Brad? Where was that?
Oklahoma City Boat Show.
How long ago?
Long time ago. I don't even know what year. Long time ago.
Do you remember it? Like, were you nervous? Did you have to get prepared for it? What was the...
No, because some friends of mine used to run that thing. Do you remember a guy by the name of Jason Reynolds?
It sounds really familiar.
He's over by the Eufaula area, and he bought it, and I don't even remember the name of it. Was it the Hog Trough? Was that the name of the company?
I think so. There was one.
Anyway, Jason had bought it, and he was traveling around doing that at shows and stuff. They, it wasn't just Oklahoma City Boat Show. He was paid to travel all over the Midwest with that thing and show up at, sporting shows. And they'd set up, do seminars, bring pros in. A lot of the pros that were already working the expos for different sponsors would have different time frames. And
so were you fishing the elites already, or was this pre-elites? Was this
pre-elites?
Here's a Jeffrey's drop. Was it during your Central Pro-Am days, Brad?
Probably was.
Do you remember it? Do you remember what you talked about?
I didn't fish that many Central Pro-Ams, really. The only time I really fished Central Pro-Ams was if they came inside the border, which they would come to Grand Lake once or twice a year. I would always defend the border. Do
you remember what you talked about, though?
I have no idea.
How do you not remember your first hog trough experience?
Dude, I don't remember.
Because you look at those things, and the sawed-off bass boat up there, they still have them at some of the expos.
Yeah.
At the Classic and stuff. You don't remember your first hog trough experience.
It was probably like a purple firetail worm speech or something. I have no idea. I really don't. I don't know.
Do you know what my first hog trough experience was?
What?
I was on the hog trough at the Decatur Civic Center in 1999.
So this was probably when you won Casting Kids or something?
But I got to do a hog trough seminar. And I got up there and I did a little casting deal. But there was an Oklahoma pro on the front deck of that hog trough with me. I have a picture of this somewhere. I need to find it.
How old were you?
I would have been either 13 or 14.
I've seen pictures of when you won that.
Do you take a guess on who I did a hog trough seminar with?
From Oklahoma.
In
99.
In 99.
That was a Bassmaster event, right? It was Casting Kids?
Yeah, it was. But it was just the Decatur Sports Expo.
You gave it away right there when you backed off. I'm going to go with Jimmy.
No. Tommy Biffle.
Oh, my gosh. Seriously?
There's a photo of me in gold spectacles with Tommy Biffle on the hog trough. He had that baby blue. Remember the Quantum when it was like baby blue and black with the embroidery across the chest?
Jersey, yeah.
Yeah, with the hat with the rope that went around the bill of the hat.
Was he wearing the Biffalo shorts?
100%. I need to break that photo out again. But anyway, that was a long story to say. John Soukup started the Bass Tank, which is electronics, which reminded the hog trough. Now it's known in the electronics world. So he just won the NPFL a couple weeks ago on Eufaula. I know he's done a lot of different interviews on this, but I really want to kind of pick his brain on how he's obviously going to think it went well because he won $50,000, but kind of how the whole tournament was run, the kind of vibe that he got from the other 110 anglers that were there, and how everything went down at Eufaula. There's 5 more of these things. So
I stopped by the Bass Tank probably before you and I left to go to Florida, probably 3 weeks before their first event.
Mm-hmm.
And he and I were talking, and we were in his office, and he was like, "Come here, man, I got to show you this breakdown." And dude, he is so analytical. He had broke down things that just I couldn't even. I was like, "Oh my God, this guy's like ready to go fishing." Dude, he had numbers, stats against his competition on the lake that he was fishing. I mean, he had so much homework done.
this was before the tournament.
Yes. Yep. He done a lot of work, man. A lot. Like, that man was ready to go. Remember what I talked about yesterday about Apollo Creed? Like, we don't want a man like that in our life. We don't need one. Like, that is true.
Mm-hmm. He can outwork himself sometimes. I've had this conversation with him.
Yeah.
I've told this story once before, and I don't know if I remember it with you, but we were at Texoma, and we had fished the Bass Nation, and there was an open tournament the next week, and I think he finished like 5th, and I finished 3rd, and he calls me afterwards. He says, "Hey, there's an open tournament. I can guarantee we'll have 18 pounds. We'll win. I just need a guy who can cast, catch him out of the back. I've got him dialed in. I just messed up this tournament. I know what fish, where we're going to catch them." I've heard this before.
Yeah.
It never works out.
Yeah.
The man shows up with one of these, legal pad.
Yeah.
And on it says, 6:57 takeoff, 7:12 arrive at spot, 7:12 to 7:15 throw, black whopper plopper, Matt throws, Vixen, and he has it all the way down to 3 p.m.
Had it all mapped out.
To the minute.
Yeah.
And I have traveled and covered a lot of tournaments, and I'm like, John, this is not normal. No one does this. And he's like, "Well, I do it." I was just along for the ride.
He's very analytical, and he puts a lot of time and effort into it. But, man, I was just taken back because, like you say, I've been doing this a long time. I've traveled with some of the very best in the world, and the amount of effort and work he'd put into this season, not just this tournament alone, but the entire season is pretty remarkable and incredible, especially considering he's got like 3 or 4 businesses going right now at the same time, and he's got a house full of kids and a wife, and then dude's definitely driven right now, for sure.
We did have 18.5 pounds. We did stick to the schedule, and at the end of the
day...
Really? We won the tournament. Dude, we were on... I'll say we were on Washita Point, biggest community hole on Texoma, would you say?
Yeah.
And there's some guys fishing, and he goes, "Hey, are you guys in the tournament?" And they're like, "No, we're practicing for tomorrow." And he's like, "Hey, man, there's 3.5 to 4 pounders here. We're going to catch them and leave. If you could give us this spot, like I'm telling you, they're here. You don't need to practice anymore." And they just like looked at him like, "Are you serious?" And they backed off, but they were kind of taken back. And then at the end of the day, he's like, "Hey, I broke this fish off. I need to go catch it." I didn't even stand up. He went, he caught it. He said it was a 4.3. It was a 4.3. We weighed in. The same dudes that he asked to leave that point were at the weigh-in to see what the weigh-in was. We had 18.5 pounds. They came up and were like, "Boy, you weren't kidding, were you?" And he's like, "No, I told you, man. I told you that's where the fish were." So after his win, I got a call from another NPFL angler. He's like, "Is John going to do this to us all year?"
Really?
And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "The offshore live scope deal?"
Yes.
I was like, "Yeah." I said his biggest thing, and we'll talk to John about this, is making it last 3 days.
Yeah.
Because you're dealing with transient, nomadic. What was the word? Pelagic or pelagic?
Pelagic.
Because I mispronounced it. You pronounced it right last year.
I don't think pelagic is the word. I think it's pelagic.
Okay.
I think.
You're dealing with pelagic fish a lot of that times, unless they're relating to the brush piles.
You're dealing with an Oklahoma fisherman, too, asking how to pronunciate words.
But you're dealing with fish that are moving, right?
Yes, pelagic is the roaming fish, the one that doesn't go to the bank, the one that lives in the middle of the pond that basically spends his life roaming and chasing bait fish. Blueback herring lakes are very pelagic.
Yes. But those are the fish that haven't been targeted, and then in the past 3 to 4 years, those fish are like, why are we getting caught?
Right.
Would you not agree?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Oh, there they are. Especially if you watch John on TV, because he's literally not making a cast until he sees one, and then he chases that fish throughout the abyss.
Before forward-facing sonar, did you go years without making casts offshore, like in the middle of nowhere?
No, because all I had to do is take you to a blueback herring lake, and you all of a sudden decided, hey, I've got to start striper fishing. I mean, that's how I always related to it. I mean, to me, it's almost like striper fishing at Texoma, because those fish are pelagic, the stripers, right? And to me, that's how I can relate to it in my mind. You know, that's the only way I can get my head around it. But I know the first time I went to Clark's Hill in Georgia, dude, I'm telling you, I've got a good friend down there. It's a really good fisherman. He laughs and jokes. He was like, Hallman, it took you 5 years just to learn how to spell blueback. And he's right. Like, it was hard to get my head around that.
Let's get caught up on the tournament stuff. I see John is in the queue here. He's actually down in Texas practicing for a tournament, so we will take a break then and then come back with John to talk about the NPFL, the Bass Tank, and everything that's going on. But I want to save this for after, John, but Steve Kennedy is on our radar, and what happened and what he did on yesterday. I thought maybe I was the only one. I thought I was maybe a little bit of a softy because my palms were sweating. I was physically nervous watching what he was doing below the dam there. Not that he would ever do anything unsafe. If there's anybody that I trust in a high current boulder rapid situation, Steve Kennedy would be in the top 3. But dude, the guy was doing some not crazy, but visually stimulating fishing. Let's just say that.
It was very visually stimulating. He was actually sipping on his Coke or coffee or whatever as he was idling, and some of the commentators made comments about, like you say, I mean, everybody's nervous but Steve spent a lot of time fishing those damn tailwaters, especially that one. He's got a lot of experience up there.
We'll talk about that because on your YouTube channel, you've actually come out with safety videos, running in the fog, dangerous, assessing danger based on your experience level, which I think is a big thing, especially with the YouTube, especially with all the live. You're seeing all this stuff happen, but you're also seeing it done by the 0.01% of anglers who literally have hundreds and hundreds and thousands of hours behind the wheel. And after we talk to John, I just kind of want to get your take on how the average weekend angler kind of processes that, and then how do you expand your horizons without putting yourself in danger, the risk versus the reward factor. So we'll talk about that. Also, we'll talk about can Bill Lowen, Dollar Bill Lowen, the turtle, whatever you want to call him.
Dude, I had a feeling about him right off the jump 2 days ago.
Really?
I was like, yes. I was like, I think Lowen is going to get his first win right here this week. This is going to happen. But then after I watched yesterday, I don't know. But I know he's there. He's there. But I don't know, man. He
is, I would put him in the top 5 of talented anglers without a tour win on his resume. He's had numerous opportunities to close the door. Chad Pipkins, big jump yesterday. The two are doing completely different things. It kind of sounds like the fish are coming to Chad Pipkins. It kind of sounds like Bill Lowen might be losing some of his big fish as the water kind of settles, but a definite shootout at Pickwick. Then over on the BPT, it is cut day for the first day. Dustin Connell continuing his roll, off to a hot start this morning on Sam Rayburn, a very stingy Sam Rayburn. So the second half of the show, we want to talk about the safety, and then I also want to talk to you, because I've experienced this a couple times in the Opens and other tournaments, and I know everyone does when you are on a really, really, really good body of water. Which is what, would you say Sam Rayburn qualifies as a really, really good body of water right now?
110%.
It's way up there, but it's just fishing like crap.
Yeah.
And how do you tackle that? Because if you're on a crappy body of water, you're like, oh, maybe they're not here. Oh, the fish population isn't high. But when you know you're on a high population of quality fish and they're just not biting, that's a whole different mentality and a whole different mindset to figure that out. So that's what we want to talk to on that. I'm going to get the commercials queued up here. See, I got into the segment and then realized this is only the second day that I've run the commercials. And we will bring John in and see what's up.
Mr. Soukup, the champ.
BTL. We'll be right back.
The ultimate fishing system starts with Lowrance HDS Live. The best fish finding tools, from chirp sonar and fish reveal to active imaging and new active target live sonar, and complete touchscreen control from your trolling motor to your big motor. For a limited time, building the ultimate fishing system will be easier on your wallet. Upgrade to HDS Live with a Ghost trolling motor, active target sonar, or live site sonar, and save up to $800.
Basscat's legendary 20-foot platform has been paired with angler-approved accessories for 2021. Puma FTD features the proven hull used by many of the top names in bass fishing today, backed by a transferable lifetime warranty. The Puma FTD boasts a full team deck concept which enhances efficiency for you and your tournament partners. Turnkey tournament-winning performance. The Puma FTD SP from Basscat.
Let's face it, fishing electronics are no longer an afterthought. They've become a necessity. And at the Bass Tank, our experts match you with the right electronics, provide professional installation, and educate you to help maximize your catching results while providing support along the way. Because let's be honest, it's about catching, not just fishing. And when you're ready for better results, join the Bass Tank team. Visit us today on Facebook or go to thebasstank.com.
You've been waiting all week for this, and Sunline wants to make sure you're ready for it with bulk spools of all your favorite fishing lines.
Oh, it's so fun.
Bulk up with Sunline.
Guys, what makes our Spro lures beat the competition?
I mean, you have to admit, we nailed it with my McSticks and rock crawlers.
Man, we've all won money on my plugs.
My Wamick shop put fish in my boat.
One thing's for sure, we all count on our Spro lures to beat the competition.
Designing cutting-edge baits with some of America's top anglers. Spro lures beat the competition. To see the entire lineup, visit a retailer near you or spro.com.
All right, we are back. Bass Talk Live on a Tuesday. I guess it's Championship Tuesday for the Elite Series. That sounds kind of weird, doesn't it?
On a Tuesday. Strange.
Speaking of champions, we are joined by a champion right now. Look at him smiling.
The champ.
That's John Soukup from the Bass Tank, a good friend of both Brad and I. I've known John for probably over 10 years. We've had him in the studio before, and I guess I could say I've watched him progress as an angler.
Yeah.
Like, we both started, we kind of worked together at the Bass Nation, in the Bass Nations in Oklahoma, and then by the end of it, I'd say the last year and a half, we would be working together, but every time John would be like, yeah, I'm catching them, but you can't catch them. And I'd be like, what do you mean? And he's like, you physically can't catch the fish that I'm catching. Like, I'm far more advanced with my electronics and forward-facing sonar that you don't have. So, like, I mean, I could tell you where they are, but you'd be wasting your time. And I'd be like, this is not working out for me very well. I'm like, I got bite off a dock. John's like, I just got like offshore schools. Yeah. And then he'd go out and win the tournament. So, John, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time to be on Bass Talk Live this morning.
Yeah, who passed up the opportunity to talk to you and Brad?
Yeah. Lots of people you never know, bub.
Hey, Matt, first I want to say, I know Mark's not in the studio today. I hope he's getting a listen, but Mark, we love you. Thank you for all you do, man. Get well.
Awesome. Yeah, greatly appreciate it. Mark is inside recouping. You might have to speak up a little bit. I don't know. I just
can yell.
Yeah, you can yell. That'll probably help. First of all, where are you headed? Notice you are in the truck right now. I would still be celebrating, but
I'm down on Sam Rayburn. I've got a ABA 150. I guess we're down here where the BPT boys are at the same time. So that was a little odd yesterday, idling around. I had to do a little bit of idling, not a lot of fishing because I didn't want to get in those guys' way. So that was a little different, a lot of just idling yesterday.
So you won the inaugural NPFL on Lake Eufaula. I know you've done a lot of interviews. You've talked a lot about it, but one of the things that Mark always asks, and one of the first things that he asks, and in that tradition will too, have you taken the check to the bank yet? A $50,000 check, and what did they say when you took that thing in?
So my bank actually posted a picture of me on their social media.
Really?
Yeah. So, we lived in Agra, Oklahoma for 17 years. Little country town, country bank, family members, church members go to the same bank. My first loan I ever got was from the bank president. So we've actually got a bank family over there, and they root for me, man. So it was really cool. Molly's actually the one that got to go. My wife, she went in, and they had like a little mini celebration. I'm not gonna lie, they're rooting for me, so it's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Like awesome. Popcorn, cake, like that type of stuff.
Yeah. No, phone calls, text. Several different. We've got some, family members that work there as well. I mean, my brother-in-law's brother-in-law. So, we're talking Oklahoma country stuff, right? Where everybody knows everybody, everybody's related, everybody's friend. So, yeah, it's pretty cool.
All right, so going into this inaugural NPFL tournament, the BPT, the MLF Redcrest, was a couple weeks before, and we saw what Dustin Connell, what Michael Neal, what Jacob Wheeler, what some of these guys did on offshore brush piles with not only a spinnerbait and a slow bait, but particularly a jerkbait using forward-facing sonar. And I remember at the time I called a couple buddies, and I knew that the NPFL was heading there, and I was like, dude, if this thing holds, this is in John Soukup's wheelhouse based on what you've done. I know you've done a lot of stuff with wired to fish where you're visually seeing the fish on the forward-facing sonar. And then during the 3 days of coverage, I had 21 hours of live coverage, 7 hours a day. The entire field fishes for 3 days. You pretty much worked that plan to perfection. How quickly after you got there for the official practice did you know that this was going to set up for a John Soukup type tournament?
Yeah, first 30 minutes. Yeah.
Really? Walk us through the first 30 minutes of practice.
Well, Matt, and you know this, you know me very well, so I guess I forget sometimes I got to talk as if you don't know me on some things, but, I spend a lot of time before I go to the lake using on my map studies, with my relief shading and my active target on my phone. Anytime I have a chance, I pull it up and I'm going through it. I'm looking through topography, I'm looking through drains, I'm looking for humps and drop-offs, and I set a lot of waypoints on my phone. I've never been to Eufaula, but I had a very good idea of what I needed to be doing that would work for me at least one day. I have 3 days of practice. I plan on doing a day and a half offshore and a day and a half shallow. That was my plan. And then judging between the two based off what I saw. And I was really disappointed, honestly, when MLF was there and they were showing all that. I was like, I didn't want other people seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was actually, like I said, disappointing me. But with that being said, I drop in, I connect my phone through active target to my units, and boom, all those waypoints fire up. And usually I go out, and now I've got an orientation point at least where I'm going to start graphing already. And so I go to all those waypoints that I set without ever being there, just map study, and I'll usually graph within, a couple hundred yards of that waypoint. And then I'll either delete the waypoint or establish what I want to do that. Well, with that being said, I just kind of had a gut feeling, put in a certain ramp, and was graphing around. And within the first 20 minutes, I came across, a nice, healthy green brush pile right in the spawning area, right next to a little riprap spot, secondary point, the last deep water right before they go out and spawn. Just everything that you read about in the textbook and everything that is true about pre-spawn fish, it was the spot. And that brush pile was perfectly planted between that deep hole and a marina dock back behind me where they would all go spawn right back behind. So, I stopped and pulled out a jerkbait, and within the first couple casts, I caught a 3-pounder. And it wasn't the 3-pounder that told me what I wanted to know. It was the 30 other fish that followed him out while I was catching him, And so, at least my first day, that immediately told me, okay, just run with everything all the waypoints that I've got, run those, find those trees and brush that resembles this. And by the end of the first day, I had found 3 different patterns. They were all staging fish. They were main lake stagers, midway back stagers, and then the very last stagers. So I had 3 different patterns found. I could catch fish, 3 different ways, same techniques, but 3 different fish. The main river fish, the midway back, and the all the way back fish. And I had about 15.5 pounds on day 1 of practice, but I could have caught like 30 to 50 fish. And honestly, from studying Eufaula Lake, I didn't think that I knew that I'd stumbled into what was possibly a top 10 pattern. I didn't know that I had the winning pattern. I never knew that I had the winning pattern. Even as I went in weigh in on day 1 with 21.5 pounds, I never thought that I, had this tournament won because Eufaula's record of having such huge stringers.
Mm-hmm. The question that you brought up with you talking right off the bat was you were talking about you were idling in the first 30 minutes and you came across a green brush pile. For guys that don't know and aren't aware, Lake Eufaula has, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, John, after being there one time, probably within the first day that you were there, that joint's got more brush piles on it than any place, maybe Lake Lanier somewhat close to it, but I don't think that it equals it. The locals there have gone overboard. Like there's no grass there anymore, and at one time I think there was, but the brush piles have replaced that, and they're just millions of them. So anyway, back to my question. With there being so many, right, as well as I do, of anything, whatever it is type of cover, you can have too much of it, and then it becomes hard to dissect which ones are productive. This is a problem that Eufaula for most guys. You said really quick, hey, I saw a green brush pile. Explain to me what you mean by that.
A new brush pile, something that someone had dropped that winter. Whether I never actually ever hooked a limb throughout the whole practice, so I don't know if I was fishing cedar trees or if there was some cypress stuff, some baby cypress they pulled off the bank or what it was. But, it's fresh brush that had been planted that spring or winter.
And you're able to tell that from the return off of your side image or off of your live scope?
Yeah, so obviously both. But it's very simple to explain. And my explanation is if you can just imagine in the wintertime you stare through the woods, you can see forever, right? Because there's no limbs, there's no brush, there's nothing, right?
Right.
Right now I'm just looking out across the road as we're talking, and I can't see 10 foot into the woods because you got all the brush, you got all the green buds and things that are there. And that's what your return looks like when you're graphing, when you got fresh brush. It's fuzzy and you can't see through it. You can't see the limbs very well. And so, it's...
Did you notice that was kind of how you started to distinguish between the good or the more productive style brush piles while you were there? You felt like it was the greener ones?
So that's pretty interesting. So the answer is yes, but there's a big but there. What I found so the first day that we were there practicing, there was a big bass tournament, like a big bass bash tour. Mm-hmm. The big bass tour was there. I think they had like 500 boats or something on the water at the same time. So what I noticed, what was going on there, is that, and as we practiced more and more, and there was other tournaments that were out there, that some of the obvious stuff that was easy to find, it was easy for everybody to find. And so those fish, even though they were there, were the hardest to get to trigger and bite. So initially, that's my game plan, was to run that green brush, and I did find it. But what I ended up using was little offshoots of little things that were a lot smaller than that.
Okay.
And the reason I had confidence to look for that small stuff was because I'd been catching fish in practice, and I knew that I felt the fish change. Like I felt their aggressiveness change as they were getting pounded and pounded and pounded. So I ended up focusing on like little stick ups and little stobs, little things. Like the one tree on day 2 that I caught 20 pounds off of, that thing was maybe like the size of a little small Christmas tree just standing straight up. And that's kind of what it looked like too. It was not big at all. Very hard to see. Matter of fact, all I remember seeing it on my side imaging was just a touch of a shadow. And when I graph, I'll drop pins on anything that's obvious and anything that's a shadow. And if I'm in an area that I'm really confident in, I'll go back and then I'll drop my live scope and I'll scan it so I get a lot better return and know exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did that, I noticed, I was like, wow, this has actually got more to it than just a little shadow. So
talk about the shadow, because that's something that I think a lot of avid graphers use more so than what they see, but it's also something that, I mean, you can talk past, and I think that's a real important key, is to talk about what you're talking about.
You got to believe in the shadow, right? I mean, the boogeyman, he comes around the corner, and there's a shadow comes first. You know, you got to be aware of something. Shadows are real. You know, light's real, shadows are real. So when you're graphing, a lot of times your returns don't come back, and it just depends on probably the angle and different things of that nature, the speed, whether you're turning your boat, whether you're going straight, all those things. You know, when I graph, I try to go as straight as possible at all times because you get a pure return. But depending on the oddity of the angle, you may not actually see the target that you're looking for. You know, everybody's in their mind, they're looking for this big, beautiful tree. And, you know, sometimes that pole timber, you know, is only that big around. And so what you will get, though, if it's higher, if it's taller, you will get a shadow line back behind it. And so, like I said, shadows are real. You know, something caused that shadow. So typically I'll drop the pin right where that shadow started, and I'll come around and I'll either graph over it again. And when I graph over it the second time, I'll range in my icon where I'm only 20 or 30 feet ranged out. So when I go right over it, I'm trying to get it in my down view, not my side view. I'm trying to pick it up there, or in my 2D to pick it up better. And once I see what I want to see, where I get more accurate, I may move my icon where I'm a little bit more accurate, and then I'll drop down and drop the trail motor and look at it with live scope.
The other thing that you mentioned was, you said you could feel the fish changing. You could feel the pressure. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, it's just kind of like this, Matt. When you take your girlfriend out on a date, you kind of know when the time's right, you know. So it's one of those deals. The brush pile, these fish, man, they were there. You know, we were on a nice day, and I had invited them to the party, but they just weren't accepting any invitations. So the mood of the fish, man, the aggressiveness of the fish. I actually, you know, I was interviewed before the event by David Dudley and Luke Duncan and Fat Cat. They were doing all their, you know, pre-tournament, you know, questions and all that thing. And I hadn't thought about it, but they asked me how many spots I had. I was like, oh man, I got like 400 waypoints, and like 400. And yeah, I hadn't been there, but I spent 3 days graphing. But out of those, 400 waypoints, only about 20 of them had large schools of fish on it. And what I mean by large schools of fish is I was going to just catch a limit. That's all I was there for first. And that was my first goal. Second goal was just to make a check. Third goal, try to get a top 10. And so to be able to do that, I knew I needed a lot of fish. And I wanted to find areas where I could pull up and at one spot catch a limit. So I had 20 of those found. But as the practice went on and the tournament went on, one tree I may throw in there with the jerkbait, and we got that mixed stick, that we call it the double, the McDouble by the end of the tournament. I could catch doubles on certain trees because they were schooling. They would come around the tree and 30 fish would follow that jerkbait out. I'd hook a fish, and I could just see the aggressive nature of those fish. Where I may pull up to another tree and it might be in a more ideal spot, the temperature maybe, but everything may be more perfect in this certain spot. And there's fish, large fish. I had 2 or 3 areas that had multiple 5 to 7 pounders in just one tree, just sitting there. But I couldn't get those things to move, shake, change. I don't know if they were all pre-spawn or some of them had post-spawn, but they were very, very, very negative mooded, and they wouldn't move. And so those fish right there, as the tournament went on, I spent less time on them until I had a decent enough weight that it was worth the risk of sitting an hour or two and not getting a bite. So
for you guys that are listening and are not aware, Matt and I have known John for quite some time. This win and what you did there was not a surprise to us personally. Matter of fact, once you started rolling, I thought, man, they're going to turn the camera lights on. And he's going to be chasing those fish around, and they're going to be amazed with what he's about to do with that live scope. John is without a doubt, Matt and I were talking about it, in the top 10 in this world right now today.
On any forward-facing sonar.
On any forward-facing sonar, period.
I'd put him up against Patrick Walters. I'd put him up against anybody.
The comments that you're making where we talk about history and how it repeats itself, as we analyze tournaments and look back, the fact that you kind of felt like you had it dialed in enough to where you felt comfortable just spending the majority of the tail end of your practice doing nothing but idling and looking for more brush piles. The fact that you said that you had 300 to 400 of them, waypoints marked that you felt comfortable with. If you go back, and I mean way back, Brian Thrift won there, his very first win there. It was the exact same interview when he was done. He spent the majority of the tail end, the last 2 days of his practice, just idling, marking waypoints because he was so dialed in, and he was literally running 100 brush piles a day. It was a little different time of year. I think that was a post-spawn deal, but still, you know, we see this over and over and over. You're able to use forward-facing sonar with it with live scope and do what you do. Also, on top of this, guys aren't aware of what you guys are doing at the bass tank. Zeke also came, a guy that works with you at the bass tank, brings in, like, is it not the biggest bag of crappie ever weighed in a tournament ever, and brings home a huge trophy at the exact same weekend.
Yeah.
So you guys are crushing it there, and you're all doing the same thing. I mean, you guys have got the forward-facing sonar down. Tell us about Zeke and what that entailed for the bass tank.
Well, so Zeke and I, you know, I named him the Hype Man, nicknamed him the Hype Man. We call him the Hype Man. He's full of energy. He's a lovable guy. And Zeke and I went to high school together. And so we actually went our junior year, spring break, we pulled my little Sears tri-hole fiberglass boat down to Lake Fork and, you know, fish for spawners and hook alligators. That's what we did our junior year. So I've known Zeke for a long time. But Zeke, through a blessing, man, has become, you know, our sales rep, and he's a part of the bass tank. It was my crappie tournament partner when we fished crappie tournaments. And sadly, we were both kind of disappointed. We knew that this year I was going to go back into focusing on the bass world, and, you know, he was going to have to do the crappie tournament on his own. But Dylan Hackler, one of our pro staffers, he's a guide on Eufaula, amazing crappie fisherman. Him and Zeke teamed up together. They went down the Crappie Masters, which, to explain in the bass world, is, you know, like saying I'm going to a Bassmaster Elite tournament. It's that level. It's the highest level and a national tour level event. And not only did they win, they won with 43 pounds of crappie in 2 days. Now, that's 14 fish. They have 7 fish a day instead of 5. But that's a 3.06 pound crappie average. Wow. To put that in bass terms, that's literally like having a 2-day bass total of 100 pounds, having a 10-pound average in bass for 2 days. So that's
like the Falcon Lake, the one that Elias won.
Yeah,
for crappie. I mean, have you caught a 3-pound crappie yet?
I have not. I've caught some 298s, but I'm not.
And they average 3 pounds. But it was on Grenada, which is like the crappie capital of the world. They set the big crappie like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, it's like the Falcon reference is perfect.
Yeah, but I mean, think about that. Like, imagine when you catch a 3 3/4 pound largemouth, you're like kicker, big time cull. Like you're like scooping that fish unless you're on. They're catching crappie that size. But one of the things I want to talk about on this, and I've talked with you about this off air, is dependence on electronics. And I fished tournaments against you where you have gotten burned by it. I can name 3 or 4 where you're like, we go into it and we're like, dang, Soukup is. I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I'm just saying this is reality. It's just like anything. It's just like Brad. When all Brad does is flip, sometimes there's tournaments he gets burned by it for. But talk a little bit about the multiple days, because now you're fishing these NPFLs. They're 3-day tournaments. There's been a lot of tournaments in the past where you have those good days, but you're not talking about fish. In some cases, you're talking about fish that are prone to moving. They're prone to leaving. They're there based on bait. They're transitioning. They're stopping when you're offshore, when you're forward-facing sonar. Talk about your process of targeting these fish and figuring out how to make that pattern last for multiple days and not just one day, and then they're not there and you don't know what the heck to do.
Yeah, well, I think looking back, there's a lot of tournaments. I've been to a couple Bass Nation National Championships. I've been to the Force Wood Cup. And I did all that pre-electronics, like pre-electronic skills. You know what I mean? So the electronic skills are very important. You know, obviously we built our whole company around it because I knew it was a need. I'm not an electronics guy, but the one difference in electronics is just a tool.
You can't say that anymore, John.
Yeah, that's not something
that one doesn't work for you anymore.
We'll strike that from the record.
Well, it's been out of necessity. It's not because I'm that guy that just wanted to. Like now I'm excited about it. But here's the difference. What I feel like now compared to, I don't know, the Bass Nation Regional when you snuck up on day 3 and jumped me because I was leading the tournament at Guntersville is like, for instance, that Guntersville tournament. I think after day 2 I was in 4th place or something overall, and I was averaging 18 pounds a day. I figured out in the tournament how to catch those fish on day 1 and day 2. Day 3, I went back and tried to repeat what I was doing on day 1 and 2. I had a bunch of followers following the whole day. It had me fixated on doing the same thing. And I think I'm older and I've made all my mistakes. I've made a lot of mistakes. I'm still going to make a lot more mistakes. But I got enough experience now that tells me, hey, I've burnt myself like this before. I've got to be able to fish open-minded. And these electronics are allowing me to fish open-minded. Even though you saw jerkbaits primarily, I caught my biggest fish on day 1 on a shaky head, on my biggest fish on day 2, a 6-pounder on a wacky rig. And I had 13 or 14 other rods on the deck. I started out the tournament throwing spinner baits and swim baits. And because I wasn't getting bit, I knew I was in the right spots. And because I could use my electronics to see that they would follow and not bite, I progressively put those down and went to the jerkbait game. And I was still, I spent a lot of time. I don't like it myself either. I got 13 to 15 rods on my deck. I love just having 1 or 2 rods on the deck. But I found that helps me keep my mind open-minded. I can taste test more. I can say, okay, something's not right. I'm going to reach down. I'm going to pick up this trap. I'm going to pick up this whatever it is, and I'm going to taste test it for a minute. And one other thing that I've done, and it might not always be right, but this is something that I do in tournaments now. And I did it on the NPFL. I really did this. I'm proud of myself for this. Is before takeoff, the guys were like, hey, where are you going? They had camera boats. And I said, I don't know. I'm going to let my gut tell me where to go. I used to not be that way. Matt can contest to that. I used to have a piece of paper and I knew exactly where I was going to go minute by minute.
Yeah, we might have mentioned that in the first segment before you jumped on.
And it worked for me in the past on one-day events occasionally, but not always. And so what I'm trying to do now is fish more, use my instincts, use the things that, the experience that I have, and apply and merge both of those together. And when they merge together, man, you can feel it because you're catching fish all the time when that's going on. I mean, you're not having these 5 fish days, you're having 50 fish days. And so that is a little bit of the difference now. And to kind of bring it a little bit more in perspective, what I'm saying is most of the time I leave myself 2 to 4 hours in the day that I just go and fish stuff that I never even practice in, because I found that I'm always catching them in practice. And then when I try to go in the tournament day and duplicate it, I'm trying to catch up with what I did the day before, and I'm trying to chase the fish, and the fish are already gone. So, that is something big that I've been implementing over the last couple of years that I've been able to see returns and dividends on. Now, with that being said, I'm not saying it doesn't make me nervous to just, decide, hey, I'm going to go practice. But, day 1 and day 2 in the NPFL, I did that. After I started catching fish, instead of hunkering down and just hammering a couple of spots, it might have been a mistake. Maybe I should have. I went ahead and moved and practiced and taste tested more areas because I wanted to see the environment in the spring. Every creek is different. Like one creek over from the other can have a completely different personality. And so I would go in those other creeks and taste test to see where they were at, whether they were moving up shallower or coming out. And that way I kind of had a little bit more information for the next day. And so that is a little bit of what's going on in my head that's different than, 5 years ago, 3 years ago even.
We're talking to John Soukup, won the inaugural NPFL on Lake Eufaula, 20 pounds each of the first 2 days, and then hung on the final day. Talked about versatility. I remember on that final day watching him, and he was kind of dying out there on the forward-facing, and he went and he started fishing some docks, and he was crawling under docks and pushing his aluminum rig under, looking for some sight fish, and then he went back out, and when I saw him mix it up, I was like, dude, he's going to win this thing. He's fishing with confidence. So up next, Wright Patman in Texas. Did you have something else to follow up on that, Brad, before we move on?
No, definitely. I wanted to move on with the tournament stuff. So Wright Patman is y'all's next NPFL. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. Texarkana, Wright Patman. So all the Okie boys, man, it's only like 4 hours away.
Yeah.
The guys that in Broken Bow, it's only 2 hours away. So yeah, please come on out, cheer us out. I'm not familiar with the lake, guys. I
don't think anyone is. Do you know anybody who's familiar with Wright-Patman?
You know, we talked about this a little bit yesterday while we were on air. We had a BFL regional down there. That's been some time, but most of the Oklahoma guys that are kind of old school BFL guys here that you might know might have a little bit of past history there. But for the most part, it's an outlier.
Yeah. So 6 tournaments in this and inaugural NPFL season, 2 in the spring, then a little bit of a break, 2 in the summer, a little bit of a break, and then 2 in the fall. $50,000 to win. They're paying the top 36 $9,000, and at the end of the year, a no entry fee championship, $50,000 for the winner. So you are in the catbird seat, so to speak, for the Angler of the Year, and you're also doing pretty well in those top 150 ABAs. That's kind of a new circuit that they did. Is it like a $650 entry fee and 3 tournaments in each circuit, and then if you finish in the top, you get to go to the Ray Scott Championship, and then also, is there an Angler of the Year payout in that as well?
I don't know about the Angler of the Year payout. You know, I'm fishing these to stay tuned in, man, and I'm glad I did, man. They're good filler events right between the NPFL, and the reason I chose to do this series is, like, you know, Sam Rayburn's down here pretty close to Wright-Patman. I know we're like 3 or 4 weeks away, but it allows me to kind of feel like I'm staying in tune with the spawn and the stages of what's going on down in this part of the world. So that's really what I'm doing. I'm practicing to keep myself tuned in.
You're always tuned in. We got a question here that I saw from one of our people watching on YouTube live, and it's a question that I know that you are very opinionated about, and it's one that we get all the time about the live scope, and you could pass this on to our listeners. The question is, John, is your live scope mounted to your trolling motor or separate pole, and why?
Okay, so mine is connected to my trolling motor, and it's connected to my trolling motor because I'm a very active fisherman who chases fish. I chase fish if they move off the brush pile. Like, for instance, Eufaula Lake, day 1. I keep on getting confused whether it was day 1 or 2. I cannot remember at the moment. I think it might have been the end of day 1 and the beginning of day 2. The fish were not on the brush. And, Brad, you've probably seen this thousands of times. They were related to the brush, within 100 feet of the brush. Mm-hmm. But when they get active, they don't actually live on the brush pile unless the bait's coming to them. If there's a good current, if there's good wind, if there's something of high sun, and the water temperature is really warm, they may suck down and get in the shade. But on a cooler spring day when things are just getting right and they get active, and there's not a lot of current, they get out away from the brush and they go chasing and they go do their deal, or they just rise up in sun, get a tan. That's when they go to the beach, and so you have to scan and you have to find them. And guess what? They got little fins and they're moving, so you got to stay with them. You can't do what I do that way with a pole deucer. Now, with that being said, and what I mean by a pole deucer is having your live scope mounted to a pole. Now, with that being said, if you're a guy that likes to go and spot lock on a brush pile and just make tons of casts the same brush pile, you fish a little bit slower, and listen, man, I'm not very far away from it, and you're getting older, and you're just you don't have that ability, so you need to be able to have a hand control, then that's for you. So I'm not one way is right or wrong. But if you want to do what I'm doing, then you have to have it mounted on your trolling motor.
Awesome answer.
Good stuff. Well, John, I know you are actually sitting at the boat ramp, and Sam Rayburn doesn't have the best cell phone coverage in all of the area, so John was nice enough to kind of have a late morning, get a cup of coffee, and share some time with us. So get out there, do your thing, go mark 1 billion brush piles, and look for shadows.
This is different, man. This is about grass, and it's different. So this is a lot of practicing for me. One of these days, I might have another big event down here at Rayburn. I'm not as confident about this one, but I've got to learn.
All right, so let me throw the one best piece of information I can give you with where you are right now, as far as fishing in general. The in-town Zapata, right next to the ramp that you are right now, is a donut store, and inside that donut store, they had the very best breakfast tacos you have ever eaten. I will drive 10 minutes out of my way in the morning before I go launch on a practice day to get 2 of them, possibly 3. Zapata, Texas.
Where he's not in Zapata.
It's at Rayburn. That's where he is.
Oh, Zapata's at Rayburn. I got you.
Did I say Zapata?
Yeah,
That's
you said
correct.
Zapata. That's
Zavala.
Falcon.
Zavala.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Super
Zavala.
confused.
Zavala, Texas.
Yes, that is right there.
The donut store, dude. It's the donut store. They've got a Mercedes, and like a Cadillac parked outside. Those are the women that run it. They make some money, I promise. And it's not the donuts.
Oh,
it's
I
the
know where
breakfast
you're talking
tacos.
about.
Dude, it's incredible. Do not miss the breakfast tacos today or tomorrow morning.
All right, man.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
There you go. John Soukup, winner of the NPFL.
Zapata, what the
That's
hell
a
was I
long drive
thinking?
for some breakfast tacos, Brad.
Golly. Zavala. It was the Z. But yeah, man, those things are incredible. John has got that thing so figured out. It took me back. So I had a really good friend, Mark Jeffries' just friend as well. I actually met him through Mark up in Missouri, and I just completely went blank. Why did I just do that? Same thing back in the day when it was 2D sonar, and Wes Endicott was the king of that at Table Rock. I mean, he had it so dialed in, the ping speed and all these different things, and setting your bottom depth level and raising it. And, when we were dropping straight on them, when the video game really started, okay? And he was the same way as John. Like, he was just so far advanced, had spent a tremendous amount of time doing it, and just listening to him talk about the knowledge that Endicott had at that time on that 2D sonar was just incredible. And that was a couple of years before you saw the Elite Series up there. I think Edwin and Todd Faircloth, they were playing the video game. I think Todd may have even won
2006
that tournament.
on Table Rock when he had the Magic Tree.
Yeah, so this was probably about 04 when Wes was really just unbelievable up there in the Ozarks with that 2D sonar and drop shotting and doing those things. I mean, back in that day, we weren't even using braid. We were using, or he was using, I shouldn't say he was using a swivel in between his line just because the drop shot would twist so much, because you had to Texas rig it because he was putting it in the trees and in the brush piles and things. And the fact that he could see fish the same way John's seeing fish, he could distinguish between, on 2D sonar, he could distinguish between a trash fish and a bass. Just by the return coming back up on that sonar, by the way that the line was designed and how hard it was, and the return basically, it was amazing to get in the boat with him and watch him fish. John's the exact same way.
Pretty impressive. But I also will say this, though. Would you not agree that a lot of the guys who are whizzes at their sonar, and we kind of didn't give them enough credit for this, are also really good if you take all the electronics off their boat?
Wes Endicott's incredible without.
And John is also the same way. Everyone goes, well, they just rely on these. I hear that so many times. A fishy guy is a fishy guy and will figure out a way to catch it. The guys at Grand who got their butt kicked by the Alabama rig for the first year after it came out in 2011, guess what? 2 years later, they were winning again.
Yeah.
The fishy guys are the fishy guys. Regardless of what is out, they will find a way to have the edge and to catch fish.
So the thing that he touched on today that really shows how far advanced he is in this, and this is what you guys are going to see. So like everybody listening to this show is watching a lot of live coverage from all the different tournament platforms, and you're seeing guys on day 3 and day 4, and they're using their forward-facing sonar, and you're going to start seeing it over and over and over where guys are going to die watching that sonar. They're going to have terrible days because they are watching the fish chase, follow, they know they're there, and they can't get them to react, and they're going to plunder. And this is the learning curve and the evolution of this.
And the guys going down the bank that are
right.
fishing the bushes, throwing, making as many casts, are going to catch ambush fish that you can't see on it and win tournaments.
But John was able to talk about the fish that we're following, that he's already learned that lesson. He knows when to quit. He knows when to leave them. That's what he was talking about. And that's not where the entire pro circuit is yet.
Just like a bedfish,
they're not
right?
to him. Correct.
It's like if you've never seen a bedfish and you see one, but if I go out with you, you can make 2 pitches on a bed and go, that fish isn't ready.
Maybe able to drive right by it. Not even make, one flip as you go by, and hey, that fish is not big enough, the time requirement, those kinds of things. John is able to make that call quicker than others. And you watch this year, you're going to see a lot of guys on live that have had really successful days getting to that point, and they're not going to be able to give it up because they're not going to bite on that day, and they're going to watch them, and they're going to talk about how they're chasing their bait, they're nipping their bait. But at the end of the day, if they don't quit on those fish, it's going to cost them. A lot of guys are going to learn that lesson the hard way, and John was saying just a minute ago, he's already learned that years ago, and that to me shows his maturity level and how much more farther advanced he is.
Yeah, and I think there's a number of guys we're seeing with that. I can see Edwin, who is learning this process now, becoming lethal with that Lowrance up front.
Yeah, and it won't take long.
I could absolutely. I mean, that guy is obsessed about becoming the best with that up front. Yeah. So, I would expect to win. We're going to pay a couple bills here, run a couple commercials, and then come back, and I still want to get into Steve Kennedy's treacherous run. I also want to ask you a question. These southern smallmouth are totally different than any of the other smallmouth.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a little bit of a question about that and their aggressive nature. I got something else on the list that I can't remember. It's because I'm looking at the wrong list. I'm looking at my list of how to actually queue up a commercial. Oh, Mark Davis. You talk about old school.
Yeah.
He's catching the heck out of them
in
the BPT. Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit about old school. And I want to know how long good spots stay good. Because, I mean, there's a chance that Davis could be catching them off something that he fished on Rayburn in like 1990, right?
110%. Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
So we'll run a couple commercials and then come back, talk about those things, and then wrap the show up. Big thanks to John Soukup of the Bass Tank for joining us as our guest. We'll be right back.
Pro-inspired, pro-designed, tested and proven by legends on the water, dominating the tournament trail for over 50 years. Everything you need, one legendary brand. Strike King.
Hey guys, Major League Fishing Pro, Jacob Wheeler here with my new Signature Series line of rods with Duck It Fishing. We have my 7.2 cranking rod right here. Crankbaits can be very fickle, and having the right, having a lot of tip can be too much, and having not enough tip can, lose a lot of fish. So you really got to be careful. If there's one or two techniques that I'm really adamant about having the perfect action as a crankbait, especially like a square bill, a DT6, those medium running crankbaits in the springtime when those fish's mouth are pretty tough. That's when I'm really on top of having my actions just perfect.
All right, we are back, and I want to get into the safety aspect of this stuff.
Okay.
Did I mute my mics? Can everyone hear me or not?
I can hear you loud
I know
and
you
clear.
can hear me, but I don't know if people can. Because, even if I do this... No, we were good.
No, I wasn't. You muted me. I didn't hear it. Like, it was gone. Maybe it was my headset.
Is it back now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Well, let's talk about Steve Kennedy then.
Okay.
So yesterday on the Elite Series, you watched this. Steve Kennedy's on live. You go to him. That's below the Pickwick Dam, right?
Yeah, he was giving this cameraman, you said the seminar, and that's what it was.
Yeah, he was giving him a seminar about safety.
Yeah.
So they're below, what's the dam right there where the water's rushing out? That's the Pickwick Dam.
That's the Wilson
The
Dam.
Wilson Dam going into Lake Pickwick.
Correct.
Water's up. They've had all the gates out. That's why it was postponed for 2 days. There's a lot of water where there wasn't water before, and it's turbidity.
Yeah.
Turbid. Very turbid water to where the boat is
rocking,
meandering in the undercurrents.
Right.
He's got his life jacket on and he's telling his cameraman, hey, he's pointing to the camera. He's like, if something happens, that doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. Nothing matters. The only thing that matters is stay upstream of the boat so you don't get caught between a rock in case they wet over.
Yeah.
So then he stands up in this eddy. He almost falls over 3 times. Vintage Steve Kennedy hooks a 5-pound smallmouth, gets caught in a tree that was 7 feet out of water behind a boulder that was 10 feet out of water the day before. Almost lands it. The line's frayed. Heartbreaker, loses the fish. But it got me thinking, everyone's seeing this and you're seeing all the reactions and all the comments. How do you draw the line of what is a competitive move to where your limits and you're safe and you're not putting people in jeopardy, and what is reckless? Because here's my thought on it. This is what Steve Kennedy's done for 30 years. If there's one person who knows how to read water, read currents, get behind something, stay safe, and keep others safe, it's Steve Kennedy. He's done it over and over again. He's made a career out of it. But at the same time, how do you know that it's not, I shouldn't do that, but I really need one more fish to make that cut?
You could tell by his body language that he had been in this position many times before. Like I say, he was sipping on his Coke as he was idling up, and it was eye-catching scary right? What he was going through with the water coming over the boulders. And I mean, when you can tell this stuff from a television screen, you know that if you're there, it's, 10 times that. But he was so relaxed and so calm going through the motions there. It's just from his experience. So where does it cross the line? One, the way that he approached it with all of his experience, he didn't run up there 100 mile an hour.
Mm-hmm.
He eased up there. He idled. He took his time. He knew, hey, there's some rocks and I may not be able to see. There's some boulders. There's some current out of this side, that side. And he even said out loud, he said, really, I'm just looking around. Like, because he didn't know the lay of the land with the water at that level, with that current. So he's looking for breaks and where he thinks the sweet spot might be in a break. And then once he sees one of those eddies that he thinks looks attractive, then he's taking his time to get there. There's no doubt that even he had pushed it to the point, because whenever he got to the trolling motor, it was very difficult for him to stay on it, right? I mean, it was obvious that he was having a hard time keeping his footing. Those guys are fishing for their entire lives. Steve's extremely experienced. They're the best of the best in the world. They're fishing for $100,000, classic spots. The risk for reward for him is there because he can go do it safely. And, 999 out of 1,000 times he probably does do that safely, maybe even more than that. But for the average guy, man, I mean, it could get down to 1 in 10.
I would never have attempted that right now as me not having experienced that before.
Yeah.
It's almost a scenario in that I feel like I would need to be with someone like a Steve Kennedy who would maybe walk me through that a time or two, where you have that strong current and you're with someone who knows how a boat is going to respond with the currents, with the boulders and the rocks, before I would feel comfortable doing that myself.
Here's something else that I thought of yesterday as it was happening. His trolling motor wouldn't even keep up with the current, right? And he's got one of the new ones, whether it's the Lowrance or it's
I can't remember whether
he has one of the new ones.
Yeah.
Okay. And where I'm going with this is that it is
powerful,
twice as strong almost as what we had just 2 years ago, right? All the new ones are faster, a lot faster. That probably wouldn't have even been possible 2 years ago. So see, we've it allowed him to up the game a little bit, to up what you could stand in and stay in. And he's sitting in an eddy and it won't hold. Dude, my Garmin will GPS at like 5, almost 6 miles an hour. I mean, it is fast. That unit that he's using is the exact same way. So he's sitting in an eddy and it will barely hold him. Actually, he was losing ground slowly, but he was losing ground on it. It's up the game even more. So, man, it's not something that the average guy should just be going to try. You dang sure need to be trying it just to go fun fishing, because, dude, there's 5-pounders all up and down that lake. We've seen that, right? Guys are catching them. You don't have to be right there in that spot. With that being said, there's a lot of guys that live there and they know what that is. Life jackets are a must. I think his rule of thumb, which is something that I would have never thought about in my personal experience, is like, if you fall out of this boat, you better get on the upside current of this sucker, because it's the thing that will kill you.
Because naturally you're going to want to drift and you're going to be floating and you're lighter, so you're probably going to want to drift down current with the boat behind you, grabbing onto it, should you go overboard.
It becomes a much larger life-threatening risk if you're by yourself than if you have someone with you that can operate a boat. Because if you fall out of the boat by yourself, your chances of being separated from that floating down the river and not being able to get to it are pretty high. That's one thing to think about. And then water temperature is the other really, really big factor when you're talking about life-threatening situation. When you start talking about low 50s degree water temperatures as opposed to mid 60s and above, it's safer. But when you're talking about cold water temperatures, the guys on Deadliest Catch used to use the 50-50 rule. If it's below 50 degree water, you can survive about a 50-yard swim. You got a 50% chance of surviving a 50-yard swim in water 50 degrees or colder.
Oh, wow.
And those are the guys in Alaska. But man, it's something that's out there. Those guys are doing it. I understand exactly why they're doing it. I think they're perfectly capable. I don't think it's something that should be
Yeah, I wasn't saying that. I mean,
ruled
they're
illegal,
professionals.
but it's definitely something that needs to be observed from the outside.
And they postponed the tournament for 2 days so that you know that it felt it was safe.
Yeah.
So the other thing I noticed in that smallmouth that he hooked there, and some of the stuff that Kobe Krieger and how these are like totally different wild beast animals than any other smallmouth that I've seen. That Tennessee strain of smallmouth. If you watch, and we watched Zaldane and how he was doing it, and some of these guys, it seems like there's numbers and areas, and I know that they're grouped up more because of these currents and eddies.
Yep.
But it also seems like these fish are actively hunting. Like big fish are kind of loners that are actively hunting and super freaking aggressive.
Well, one of the things that happens with the current, just like we talked about, I think yesterday, where the current puts more fish into one place, right? Okay. With that being said, with more of them being there, then it becomes not only the currents pushing, they got them all gathered in one spot, they're sitting there in one spot waiting for bait. The competition is the biggest thing that's setting off those big fish, right? I mean, even when we're on Kentucky Lake and you're out in the middle of a ledge in the summertime and you hit one of those schools, you've watched those guys many times in tournaments. You've covered those events. If they sit and catch 25 bass on 25 casts out of a school in Kentucky Lake, their 3 biggest fish will generally come out of the first 5 or 6 fish that they catch of the 25, right? It's because the biggest ones know what they're doing. They know how to eat. They didn't get big by not knowing how to eat. Same thing is happening here with the rocks, and that's why you're seeing those giants just bam destroy, because there's that competition going on. They're all there together. And so, you know, we see it on a 2D sonar or a forward-facing sonar as well. It's easier to catch fish on forward-facing sonar when there's 3, 4, 5 of them together as if there's just one by itself, even with crappie. I don't know about crappie. Shouldn't speak on that.
Would you put the TVA strain of smallmouth, like if you had to label angry, mean smallmouth?
Okay.
So there's like the West Coast stuff.
Yeah.
Then there's like this kind of Oklahoma Ozark smallmouth.
Right.
Then there's the TVA smallmouth. Then there's the northern smallmouth.
The current is what makes them so strong and makes them so tough. So, yeah, I mean, the TVA lakes have got a lot of current, and those fish have grown up in it, and they're built for it. So, yeah, I mean, without a doubt, they're probably pound for pound the strongest. Only West Coast smallmouth I've ever caught were the ones at Lake Mead.
And kind of,
there's not a pound for pound hardly in them.
A little weak.
And their stripers are even weak. But yeah, smallmouth are stronger. The Coosa River bass, this goes to all fish though, right? I mean, all river fish are stronger, even in largemouth. They're stronger.
Yeah,
the Arkansas River largemouth in Oklahoma are a much harder.
So where would you put, like, if you had to do pound for pound, are you going to go with a have you ever been up to Thousand Islands?
I've never been on Thousand Islands, no.
Okay, but you've been to St. Clair.
Been to St. Clair. I've been on Erie.
Okay, so would you put a river smallmouth in St. Clair going up to Huron and that? I mean, that's a lot of current. There's a lot of current in the Detroit River, a lot of current in the mouth of Erie there. Would you put that fish up against a TVA smallmouth, a Pickwick smallmouth, a Wilson, a Wheeler? Or is there a compare? Like, you would say that the TVA smallmouth fights harder than a Great Lakes smallmouth? Because they're different.
It may appear that way, but you're catching them totally different.
So you think the current makes them seem like they're fighting harder?
You're not going to land one of those fish that Steve Kennedy hooked yesterday with a spinning rod and 6-pound test line. Yeah. It's not going to happen. There's too much other stuff in the way. Those fish up there, you're 20, 30 feet deep, and you're further away from those fish when you hook them, and you've got a rod that's very parabolic. What these guys are doing, they're using a medium-heavy freaking stick with 20-pound test fluorocarbon on it and a 3/4 ounce spinnerbait or 1 ounce spinnerbait. I mean, they're drilling those fish. So it's hard to tell. Pound for pound, I bet the ones up north are, you know, I mean, if there was a way to measure that, the ones in the Detroit River or on the St. Lawrence, I would imagine they're probably just as strong.
How would you measure that? Like, we're way off course here, but how would you
they're built
scientifically
they're built
measure
totally
how hard a fish fights?
They're built totally different. The ones in TVA are much longer,
big broad tail.
Yeah, and they're thin. They're thinner from belly to back, but they're longer.
Mm-hmm.
The fish up north are shorter and they're taller between the bottom of their belly and their back. They're taller. They're wider at that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So they're built different. If you look at that alone, the smallmouth in the south would probably be a stronger fish, just because he's got that bigger, broader, wider tail, a longer tail. He's got more leverage.
Interesting. Looking at it, Lowen only has 3 for 6 as of 9:30, so 10:30.
I had a feeling about him, man,
so
2 days ago, and then yesterday I was watching, and I was like, man.
We'll see.
It just seemed like Pipkins and some of those guys.
Kennedy only has 1 4-pounder, but aren't you like one little eddy away from having
absolutely 30 pounds,
25 then? One more thing that I wanted to touch on was Mark Davis. He'd had like a slow couple periods, but then he came back. He had a really good day on the BPT. We know what that guy can do with the crankbait. We know he can do with the Carolina rig offshore stuff. On a fishery like Rayburn that has grass, but also has, and I think I've learned, also has structure.
It does.
It has cover and structure.
Mm-hmm.
The cover changes, the structure does not, correct?
Correct.
How long will structure, and I know this is an open-ended question, stay good? Like, are there possibly spots that he was fishing in the 80s and 90s that are good in 2021?
Yes. Yes. So the structure at Rayburn is primarily going to be the some of the points and the ridges that run out and the hard spots that are on those pieces of structure, right? And whether it's some type of cover being a shell bed on one of those ledge points or something like that. Now that shell bed may move because it moves with current. Shell beds tend to load up wherever the current sweet spot is, where it catches the most. And depending on what happens with that river channel as it kind of silts and moves, and they do move a little bit through the years, that sweet spot being that the cover, the shell bed may move 100 yards, 200 yards, a half a mile, quarter of a mile, something like that, up and down that piece of structure, that ridge, that outside river turn bend, or the point that runs out on it. But other than that, yes, it could still be the same. And that's something you can find very quickly with electronics if you were very dialed in.
Do you have spots on Grand, Eufaula, Texoma that have been good for 20 years?
So places like Grand, see, now we're talking, Rayburn's a lowland reservoir, so it's going to change more. Grand being more of a Midland and Highland reservoir type, it's not going to change as much because, dude, it's bedrock. So their creek channels and river channels don't move as much, especially the further you get down to Grand. So absolutely, there are places that will always be good there. It's just a matter of when.
And then the fish just move up and back, so there's no way they get conditioned, even though those fish have gotten fished there every single pre-spawn, spawn, post-spawn, in summer for the last 30 years.
Well, that could be the issue too. And I know before we went on break, you were like, how long can a spot stay good? Well, you're talking about, for over a period of years from Mark Davis, a spot can only stay good as long as it's not taking a lot of pressure. As soon as a spot takes a lot of pressure, I don't care how good it is, it goes quick. That's why guys are the way so protective as they are. Mm-hmm. They go quick. They're good because nobody's fishing them, or very few are fishing them.
Okay, then let me ask you this. How do you determine, or how do the fish, in your opinion, sense pressure? So we hear this all the time. There's fishing pressure. Oh, the lake has a lot of fishing pressure on it.
Mm-hmm.
Are they fish that have gotten caught and educated and they stay there, but they don't bite, and they hear or they sense things or they recognize the vibration and they go into a negative feeding mode? Are they fish that have been taken off and new fish don't move up? What creates pressure? Because you could also argue on the devil's advocate side, I don't think that's correct, but you could also argue on the opposite side, well, it's a great spot. It's a shell bed on a channel swing that there's been fish there for 20 years. So yeah, you can sit there and blast them one day. You're going to take these fish off, and new fish are just going to move up because there's only a certain number of fish that can be held in a certain area. So you get some that are freaked out and they are like, I've gotten caught, or they recognize some vibration associated with a negative connotation. And then new ones go, oh, look, there's a spot for me. And they slide right back up into it, and it just stays good.
Right. This is my feeling on a lot of fish, from bed fish all the way to structure fishing, offshore fishing, and even shallow fishing on banks. If it's a community hole, it's a community hole for a reason. A lot of fish are using it, and they use it year after year after year. Whether or not they're pressured and they're hard to catch, to me, quite honestly, this is kind of how I judge some things. If they just got there I don't care if we're talking about spawning fish, if we're talking about bush flipping, if we're talking about Kentucky Lake ledge fishing. If they just got there, they're going to eat. They're going to eat pretty good. If they've been there for weeks or months and it's a place that they see a lot of baits and a lot of rotation, a lot of boats, that's whenever you start noticing that pressure. Now, that same fish on that pressure lake can go somewhere else. And I promise you, when he shows up somewhere new, he's a lot more likely to bite. It's just like the new fish that we see in the spring coming up. We see it a lot in sight fishing. I've always felt this way that once fish have been on the beds, like when we show up at a tournament and we're later into the spawn and you start trying to sight fish for that event, two things generally happen for me, it seems like. One, early in the year, I look at a fish and I'm like, that's a 3-pounder, 3.5. When I catch it, it's usually a little bit bigger or right on to what I think it is. As we get later into the spawn, it becomes harder to judge because I'm looking at the length and the width of the back, but then the fish is more post-spawn. They don't weigh as much, but the biggest thing I notice is they are a lot harder to catch. Even using some of the same clues that we use early in the spring with body language, it's harder to relate that to a fish later in the spawn because of the fact that he sat there for a long time. He's seen a lot of boats go by and he's had a lot of people mess with him. Probably has been hooked. That's probably a lot of them have been hooked and let go and they're still back there. Now, like I say, that's the same with whether it's a ledge spot or a bank fish. But
you had that conversation in Florida in the house. You came back one day and you had gotten some bites on a pad stem and you said, I'm afraid they're educated bedfish.
Yes.
And that was strictly, and you couldn't see them. They were blind fish. They were on pad stems, if I remember correctly, is what you said.
No,
but
it was the spot in Apopka. It was reeds, yeah.
Oh, but you couldn't see them.
No, I couldn't see them.
But you said those fish have seen a lot of lures and they've been up for a long time just based on how they were biting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you weren't going to come in there and flip a half-ounce weight with the big bulky plastic on it, a BFE, and they were just going to eat it. You could probably wacky rig a Cinco, put something like that in there and you'd had a lot higher chance of, and these fish could have been 6 or 7, 8 pounds, but they had been there. They'd been there a while. They'd seen a lot of baits. I could tell by the way they were biting. Yeah.
That's interesting stuff.
Well, they're just,
yeah.
And you're like a little fish would, but some of that is too hard for a little fish. And, you might just have that one, and you're like, and he swims out and you're like, okay. And so then you lean back and there's nothing there. Like he didn't even take your tail. Those are fish that, spawning fish act that way in general, but once they really get like, hey man, I've really got to be careful here, they get very sly at that.
But that's why sometimes you'll catch a blind better that you think is a bluegill. You'll miss it 2 or 3 times and it'll end up being a 6-pounder.
110%. Yeah, because it's like, I remember one tournament, Larry Ray and I won up at Grand one year, and the big bites all felt like bluegill bites on the LBJ. Every single little bite that you felt like was a bluegill and you would miss, you throw back in there and it would be a big one.
Really?
Yeah. If you could get him to bite again, it'd be a big one.
Huh. Well, we'll have a new Elite Series champion by the end of the day. We'll have a cut on the BPT. You got anything else you want to mention? I mean, sometimes we'll let the bumper music run for 4 or 5 minutes, and I go on a rant, and then Jeffries gives me the dude, we're out of bumper music.
I want to go watch Kennedy try to stand on his front deck some more.
Yeah.
Think that dude could go in today?
No.
Into the drink?
No, dude, he spent so much time on that front deck, and most of it's not even in a bass cat. It's in like a rickety aluminum boat up there. I mean, the dude's got the balance of an agile cat. He's got a damn cat on the side of his boat. That's how agile he is.
He looks shaky to me.
It'll be interesting to see. Big thanks to John Soukup, winner of the first NPFL. And BTL will be back tomorrow. We have a TBA show to be announced. Couple options. I would like to try to get Steve Kennedy on the show. The tournament will be over. It's kind of an interesting deal with the Elite Series ending today. So we might have someone from the Elite Series. We might also have some interesting news about the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame. I'm a board member of the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame.
Really?
Yeah, a board member. We have like meetings and they follow like Robert's Rules of Orders in them and stuff. We have to like second and approve, and they have budgets and everything. It's pretty fancy.
That's awesome.
But I'm more about the like teaching people about it, getting people involved, things like that. So there's some cool stuff, some acquisitions and moves that the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame has made. So we might have something on that. If not, we will definitely have it on in the coming weeks in an Elite Series show tomorrow, as Brad and I also get ready to leave Friday for the second Bass Master Open of the season, first one of the Central Division on Lewis Smith Lake. I hope I have not been doing research on the wrong Smith Lake, because as you informed me, there is a Smith Lake and a Lewis Smith Lake, and now I'm starting to think I might have been doing some stuff on Smith Lake, not Lewis Smith Lake.
We'll have to check into that.
Yeah. Anyway, that's it for a Tuesday for BTL.